The Honourable David Parker.
Mr Speaker, I want to explain why the Labor Party thinks this bill should go to Select Committee, even though we think that the provisions in this bill are too broad and absolutely outlawing all ISDS clauses. Mr Speaker, the National Party should consider why it is that 6 years into their government, in respect of proposed trade agreements, including the last one that we've just negotiated with South Korea, which is of substantial benefit to New Zealand, why it is that there are thousands of people marching in the streets against free trade agreements. And one of the reasons why there is marching in the street against free trade agreements is that there is public suspicion around investor-state dispute resolution clauses, and there are some well-founded concerns about some ISDS clauses, and there are also some incorrect concerns about ISDS clauses. But we're not going to resolve this as a country by refusing to have the debate about the rights and wrongs of them. Mr Speaker, investor-state dispute clauses allow corporations to sue governments for breaches of those corporations' rights as set out in free trade agreements. Now, that's very important, particularly when you are dealing with countries that have got corrupt judiciaries, or judiciaries that might be too close to the government, not independent of government, who might effectively confiscate the assets of a New Zealand investor investing into a third-party country. So that's why you have ISDS clauses. The negative of them is that if they're not properly drafted, then you can allow corporations to sue governments for doing what governments ought to be able to do without suit, and that is properly regulate for the benefit of their own country, whether it be for public health reasons like plain packaging of cigarettes, or alcohol control, or if you want to introduce controls on how much sugar is in food, for example. Those sorts of things are appropriate things for governments to be able to do, and they ought not to be able to be successfully sued by overseas corporations for doing so. You need to be able to properly regulate the environment, including have, for example, a proper price on carbon, or to have improved standards of water quality, which might somehow impinge on the cost of production in a way that a corporate might not like. Governments should be able to do that without being sued. Mr Speaker, when you get the New Zealand Medical Association turning up, making submissions to Select Committee saying that they're concerned about these things, the government should not just say, we're right, we know what we're doing, and close down debate. That's why we're supporting this to Select Committee. I want to give another example of why this is important arising out of the South Korean Free Trade Agreement. The South Korean Free Trade Agreement allows the screening, pre-investment of existing categories of investment. We do that for farmland at the moment, but it does not allow new categories of screening of foreign investment, i.e. into New Zealand homes, existing homes. That is a mistake. Theoretically, if a future government was to introduce a ban on the sale of homes to overseas people, South Korea could object. And a corporation from South Korea who couldn't make an investment could say, I've suffered a loss, and sue the government. Now, the cost of those processes is so high, the inability to prove loss, because they can make an investment somewhere else and make a buck somewhere else, means that in all likelihood you won't get an ISDS claim on an inability to make a residential property purchase, but nonetheless the theoretical risk exists under the ISDS clauses in the South Korean agreement because of how the government has negotiated. They're making the same mistake in the TPP, and all of those mistakes flow through to the Chinese Free Trade Agreement, because the most favoured nation provisions in that mean that later, more permissive agreements flow to the benefit of China. That shows why you have to be careful with ISDS clauses and the clauses that relate to them, and that's why we should have a debate about this in Parliament. The Labor Party is not saying that ISDS clauses are always bad, particularly with third world countries. We are saying that in respect of first world countries, we would be willing to rely upon state-to-state resolution and forego ISDS clauses. We think this is a proper debate to have in New Zealand, Mr Speaker, and that's why we are supporting this bill to Select Committee.
Dr Shane Retty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise